Good morning. We're in Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Hamagbihi L'Sheves, Hamashpili Liros B'Shamayim V'Aretz on page 424. So the Mittler Rebbe explaining, going back to a fundamental theme he addressed much earlier in the Maimer, as I pointed out, page 380 and on. And this is actually elaborated upon in Ayin Beis. This is included in Ayin Beis, that there are Kel Deus Havaya, two perspectives, Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Or in the context of Yichud, Yichayir Yichud, Yichud Elah, and the lower Yichud, Yichud Tata. With Das Elyon being the perspective from above, the Yesh Amiti, reality is God, the true reality. And from Yesh it goes into Ayin. It's a Mamai Lamata approach. That is, even though I should actually not use that word here, because here, Hamagbihi sounds like Mamata Lamayla. It says clearly it's Mamata Lamayla. But we'll discuss that later. But Hamagbihi, so we'll get to that shortly. But basically, from the Yesh to the Ayin, and the Ayin is being driven. In other words, what is Mamat Lamayla is that the Ayin is being absorbed into the Yesh Amiti. So the process is all about God. From the Yesh to the Ayin, and the Ayin being completely absorbed with and completely losing its entire identity as it gets closer and gets encompassed in the source. And that he calls Hamagbihi L'Sheves. So the Etzem itself doesn't need Hamagbihi because the Etzem is higher than Milo Mato, than being elevated or going down. But the Oyer, or what he calls the Ayin of Chachma, Hagduma, like Keser, is completely being absorbed into the Yesh. And that is the Hamagbihi L'Sheves, to serve as L'Sheves, to serve nothing more than being a kisei, a vehicle, a throne for divine presence. And it's completely beyond ishtalshus and beyond existence. Kaidem, preceding the will even to emanate of Atzilus and Bria and to create and so on. Then there's Hamashpili Liris. Hamashpili Liris, as it says, Hamashpili, Hashpala Yerida, that's the Ayin to the Yesh, Hanivra. What's the Ayin to Yesh? Now we're talking about a divine energy that relates to existence, not one that is being absorbed in the source, that's beyond existence. It's relating to existence. And it's divine as we see it through the eyes and lens of existence, but it's an ayin, it's a bitl as well. The bitl of the yesh hanivra to the ayin, and that's the process of what he calls the second ayin, the second yud of Hamashpili, and that is the yud of the Chachma as it relates to Ma'aseh Bereishis. As Chachma descends to Bina, to the yesh of Bina, to Midas, to Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, all the way to Seif Ma'aseh, to the end of creation, the end process of creation, which is what the kavana is, and as such you have now Hamagbihi and Hamashpili. Okay, but then we learned v'omnam be'emes. The truth is, from the point of view of Atzmus, both of these are one thing. Kel Deus Havaya, they're equalized. It's true the Everest wanted two levels of Adas and two levels of Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Ayin of Yesh Nivra, as actually the Rebbe Rashab explained. He asked the question, why is it not one level of Ayin? Because the Eibishter wanted from the outset, even before existence came to be, he wanted these two levels. He wanted one Ayin that would reflect him, so to speak, in his full glory, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Hamagbihi L'Sheves, and he wanted the second Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, that would relate to and create existence. But from his point of view, there's no distinction. From our point of view, there's a parsa, hamavdelas, a partition that separates. It's two different perspectives, two different experiences. One is an experience of bittul mitzias, total nullification, total absorption in the source. The other is a bittul ayesh. There's an existence that existence recognizes the divine within it. Like when we talk about in existence itself. But from the point of view of Atzmus, it's to use the language that he said here, even though they're two havchim mamish, and one is mekame shalelam, and one is ena elam mekame, Im kol zeh, in Elam Mekemi, simultaneously they both join together. Shemagbihi l'sheves be'emekrim oz dafka mashpili lires. So it's not like two different stages, as we perceive it. It's essentially all united as one. And he says clearly, as he goes upward, l'sheves oz dafka mashpili lires the nitfes ve'ena nifnes ke'echad. Which simply means simple. It's not a simple idea, but the simple English, it means that he relates to existence, but he's not identified by it. Because you could say, and I'll explain this point a little more now, you could argue that the fact is that the creator, Atzmus, and existence are so diametric opposites that the only relationship they could have is not when both of them are their core essence, meaning the relationship with God would be with outer dimensions of godliness, as godliness relates to us, but not the etzem. That's beyond us. And as far as existence goes, we have to also have a bittul to somewhat suspend and divest ourselves of our egos and our self-interest to connect to God. And that's where we meet. But as I pointed out many times, Chassidus wants everything. That the highest level of the interface, which means that the Eibishter wants it that way, that he wants us to have a relationship with his most intimate core essence, which leaves us with a big question, and that's really the compelling question of all of Chassidus and Kabbalah, and especially Ayin Beis. How can it be? How can you bring these two opposites together? And the answer is because the Eibishter carries both, and he wants us to have a relationship. So we have both in our relationship to God, where you could say the relationship is only a limited one. No. He says, when you'll work hard enough, you'll be able to have a relationship with me on my terms. And not only that, nitfes be'ena nitfes. Not just that the divine that is completely removed and not identified by existence remains removed. In his relationship with existence, we can also have a relationship with the way he is beyond existence, which sounds initially paradoxical. Not from Atzmus' point of view. And through our Aveda, when we do Aveda properly, we can come to that type of level. Which means, simply put, when you talk about, let's say, you talk very often about being absorbed in something. You know, when you appreciate something you love, a person you love, an experience you love, you're reading a book, you're listening to music, you're seeing an awesome natural sight. So there's one stage where you're intact and you feel tremendous pleasure and tremendous awe, but you still don't say you're one with it because there's you, there's the yesh, and the yesh is experiencing ayin, a state of transcendence. That's one level. There's another level where you lose yourself. You don't even feel, and you can't even talk about it, like when you're reading a book and you're so absorbed, or a song, you don't even know you're turning pages. So then your yesh has, at least temporarily, been dissolved into the experience. And that's even a higher level, because they don't even have an object and a subject. Fine. But still, the question remains, when you talk about God, God is completely removed from existence. So you could say, okay, there's a point where we can get dissolved and absorbed in the experience, but can it also be on our terms that we can also relate to it? So the answer is yes, that when you grow, you come to a third state, which is both you're completely absorbed and you don't feel yourself as a separate entity, and yet it's also within you. It's also part of who you are. So in other words, it doesn't require necessarily on this third level. After you go the first two levels, you can come to a point where you can experience what he's saying here, nitfes ve'ena nitfes, that even in your very existence, you can experience non-existence. Now, I know it doesn't make sense seemingly. It doesn't make sense in the beginning. But being that we were created by Atzmus, and Atzmus is revealing this part of himself to us, he's saying, I'm giving you that power. But you're going to have to go through stages. You cannot jump there. As appealing as it may be, if you don't, like the student and the teacher, if you don't start with Aleph Beis, simple Aleph Beis, where you're learning something on your terms, Aleph Beis Gimel. That's like the Yesh is beginning to learn something beyond itself. Then you grow. Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel, we learned in Ayin Beis. You grow to a point where you begin to appreciate a knowledge that's beyond you. Okay, so the Yesh has now climbed to that point. You go even further that you lose yourself in that ayin. There's a bittul, a total bittul. And even furthermore, even a bittul that goes even higher where you don't even feel yourself as an entity. So when you do that, your kelim are becoming more refined and more expanded. As you do so, you can start appreciating the nuances and even things that were not actually spoken between the lines that your teacher taught you, to the point that you can come to experience it to the say, now I get aha, like the aha moment. You couldn't have, that aha could not have happened had you not gone through those steps. But even furthermore, we're talking here even higher because we're talking about ultimately Atzmus, which is completely not nitfas. Says, no thought can grasp him. So you can say, if no thought can grasp him, how can I be me and grasp him? And the answer is because you've gone beyond thought. The Zohar continues, he doesn't say that here, but in other places, that through the usa deliba, the desire of the heart, like you may not understand someone you love, your spouse, but that doesn't mean your heart cannot get them. There are many things that we can join with another, and you sense it and you intuit it even deeper than that. You just experience it. Doesn't mean you have to understand it. It doesn't have to be on your terms. But you can't get there if you don't first work on your terms and first understand things. Understand that which you can in your containers. And then, like similar when we count 49 days of the Omer, and then the 50th day we don't count. It's Matan Torah. That comes from above. But if you didn't have 49, you wouldn't have 50. So in other words, there are things that emerge when you do the right things, new realities and new states of consciousness will emerge. And that's really the ultimate process. The question is how far we can go. And here it's very clear that we can go all the way. Now, we never will be God. There's only one God. But the question is, how much of this God can we experience? So obviously, each one of us in our own way. But what he's really saying here is that there is that third level where these two join together. So you can have an avodah of das tachten, you can have a avodah of das elyon, but can you have them both together? Can you have the nitfas and not nitfas? Can you be present and while at the same time also be beyond? That is the ultimate experience. So God is not identified by existence. He's not defined by existence, but he manifests within existence. And for him, it's not two levels. It's one Atzmus. You can't, God forbid, create a duality that there's the God that relates to existence, there's a part of God that's beyond. Ultimately, they're one within him. We have to work our way step by step, but we can come to ultimately appreciate that. And that already, we have to talk more about how each of us achieve that level. But this is the essence of what he's saying. Nitvis ve'ena nitvis ke'echad. And then we continue. I'll go back to the parentheses momentarily. V'hainu lefi shkekel deis havayis shesevel beis hadeis. God contains, sevel sometimes means tolerate, but sevel means he carries, he contains both deis, ke'echad mamish. Why? Liyose l'mayla mebeis hadeis halal. He's beyond both of them. To say that God is beyond existence and to say God is within existence are equals for him. In other words, he's beyond even being beyond, so to speak. We don't even think about from yesh to ayin because that's also a process. The aim b'chinas haparsa and the parsa that we spoke about earlier, but the two levels of ayin, mafsik klal, does not separate at all. The shava das tachten, the das elyon, ma'acha shenimsa lamato. Like we learned that the way it is all the way above, that's how it comes down below. That's exactly the way it is above, that's how it is below. We learned that a number of times in different contexts. We'll get back to how it's in the context of Torah and so on later. But right now he's talking about Atzmus Ein Sof, and that's what he is saying. That's the summary of what we learned yesterday. What I want to do is go back to the parentheses and then continue, hopefully get to the end of this paragraph. But I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
I wanted to ask,
and I want to thank you, Yitzchak, for posting the classes, the relevant classes that I talked about this, I see 3 months ago. So definitely will help because we discussed it at length there.
100%.
Okay.
So I know you've said this a number of times that from Atzmus perspective, the Ayin Hamiti is no closer to him than than where we're holding. So even though the Ayin Hamiti we discuss it's very, very close to Atzmus, it's just sort of right outside, if you will. And I get it because Atzmus can't be defined, can't be contained. It's infinitely distant. I guess it's the infinite part that makes those two perspectives relatively equal, if you will, even though there is a big difference, let's say, between Atzilus and Asiya. I mean, you have an neshama from Atzilus, like a tzaddik, like a Rebbe, versus an ordinary person, let's say, a neshama of Asiya. Does one still say that from Atzmus' perspective, the perspectives of those two people are no different, or their conception of God, the flow of
there's
the
an aspect, yes,
them?
There's an aspect, but Atzmus also sees what he's created. So of course he knows there's a difference between a frog and a tree, and he knows there's a difference between a human being and an animal. He created them. But that's the divine as reality. You're talking from Atzmus' point of view, there's an aspect of Hashem Echad where everything is equalized because it's all part of one, how God sees everything, and there's the godliness in everything. But that is not us. We don't see it that way. We live in a world of structure.
Understood. I love it when you clarify all this, and that the intro was phenomenal. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Look, that's exactly the point. That the same godliness that sees the difference between a tzaddik and a non-tzaddik, or sees that difference, that same godliness is one with the godliness that's beyond it all. That's the point here. So it's not diminishing. He's not saying there are no distinctions. He's saying from Atzmus' point of view, distinctions and non-distinctions are the same. It's a total paradox from our understanding. We can't relate to that logically, for sure not. Maybe emotionally or spiritually, but that's exactly what he's saying. He did not say that Das Tachten doesn't exist. He says Das Tachten exists and Das Elyon exists, but they're like one. So the very idea of distinctions, I mean, I'm trying to give a little taste of it. When you hear a symphony, do you hear the individual notes or do you hear the whole music? It's only a mashal, obviously, an example. It's not perfect. So you could be focusing, if you're, let's say, studying music and studying methodology, you could be focusing on the notes and how they're being played. But a general listener to music is listening to the whole story. You're listening to the narrative, to the sentiment, to the whole experience of it. So go infinitely times more how God sees his existence, all through his own eyes. And even that's a statement when you say God sees through his eyes. All that are just words that we're using just to try to, we said, just to make it easier for us to understand. Clearly, it's not even that. It's just a oneness that is even beyond oneness in a certain way. That's really that's why this is not an easy, that's why I'm saying to reach this third level, unless you really, really understand the lower levels, it's not going to be so easy to articulate. I'm articulating it. Firstly, I've spent a lot of time, years, thinking about it and working on it and learning it. And it still remains elusive because when you start spelling it out, you say, what does that mean? How could it have distinction and no distinction? Is it levels or not levels? Is there Atzilus and Bria or there's no Atzilus and Bria? And here he's saying it's both, all in one. So it really comes down to, I mean, I don't want to say lahavdil. I remember when I read Tao of Physics, and I'm not saying I got anything from there that Chassidus doesn't have, but language. So there he talks from a physics point of view, he talks about beyond paradoxes, where there's the realities, what's called in quantum reality, states of probability, states of indeterminism, where something is not this and not that. The famous Schrodinger's cat, is the cat alive or dead? And they say it's both. How's that possible? And quantum physicists cannot wrap their head around. Even today, it doesn't make sense. But today it's been proven that there's a state like that. So you can't deny it. So that's also just an example. Obviously, God is beyond quantum as well. but an example of something that was completely counterintuitive. Open up, do a Google search, do an AI about quantum logic. It's what Einstein called fuzzy action from a distance, or God doesn't play dice with the universe. I mean, all these expressions that the physicists themselves were stupefied, and they could not believe what they were seeing. They were seeing a state that is both a wave and a particle, which is logically impossible. Can it be a table and a chair at the same time? Can it be standing and sitting at the same time? And yet, when you read the Rashba, he talks about nimna hanimnois, the expression is, can you ride a horse and not be riding the horse at the same time? That's not my example. It's an example of Sefer Ikrim, Yosef Alba, one of the great Jewish philosophers. You can't be riding the horse and not riding the horse. It's two opposites. It can't be day and night. It can't be black and white. So you understand nuances, gray areas, but to say that it's both equally, and that is just some examples to help make it a little more palatable, but it's still not completely, because here we're talking about something beyond the beyond, and yet we can experience it. I think the example I gave with love is a good one, because that most of us can relate to. You can love someone, doesn't mean you have to understand them. It doesn't mean you have to get them even. You don't have to control them. You don't have to contain them. There's something that goes beyond. There's times you understand somebody. Yes, you could have a very good friend. You could understand your spouse. You could understand your child. You love them deeply. But there's something that is not about you getting it. It's not about you grasping it or you containing it or you controlling it. It's almost you surrender to it. And in that process, you connect even deeper than when you are so-called owning it. And I'm just using more and more language just to give you more things to think about. But I can tell you right now, this is going to take a lot of thought and, more importantly, a lot of avodah. When we lose ourselves in serving another, in helping another, we start experiencing this idea. As long as you're a yesh and you are driven by self-interest, this levels will elude you. Because by definition, you can't enter there. Not as a punishment or as a threat. Because as long as you're you, it's like if your cup is full, you can't pour anything more into it. So it's critical to have a certain type of suspension of self and self-perception. You almost have to go through what they call today ego death. You almost have to go through a loss of everything you know and all your perception to be able to enter these type of places. And it's exhilarating. It's not a loss as an annihilation and a negative thing. It's just really ready to enter a new way of looking at existence. And that's really what true higher states of consciousness are. And then in that itself, there's infinite amount of levels. But that's really where we want to enter when we're talking about this, when we're experiencing this.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Amazing.
Okay, so I want to go back to the parentheses, which even yesterday when I read it quickly, figure out what the Mittler Rebbe is saying. So let's go back. The parentheses is on the fourth line of the middle paragraph on page 424. He says like this. Ubekan Omer Ribeisa. It sounds to me that the Mittler Rebbe wants to explain, so what is the pasuk coming to add? The idea of nitfus and not nitfus, we already learned earlier, without the pasuk Mika Hashem Elokeinu Hamagbihi and Hamashpili lires. So it sounds like when it says Ubekan Omer Ribeisa, meaning and here he's adding something with this pasuk. So I think that's what the parentheses is addressing. What's the Ribeisa? The Magbihi l'sheves Hamashpili. He's adding the element of Hamagbihi and Hamashpili. Because that is not just saying that these two levels of Das Elyon and Das Tachten, nitfus ve'ein nitfus like one. You're using the word to elevate, Magbihi, and Mashpili to draw down or to descend. So I think that's what he's coming to add. So let's see what he says. The gam she'ein nitfus be'elamis hu Mashpili. He's saying that we're saying that they're both the same Hashem. We say two statements. Magbihi l'sheves, that he elevates and resides there, as we learned earlier. And then he continues, Mashpili lires, the gam, she'ena nitfas be'elamis, that higher level of Magbihi l'sheves, which is not nitfas, which means it is not defined by, is not contained by, is not, you can say nitfis like les machshava tfisa beklal, is not grasped by the existence, hu mashpili. That is also the level of mashpili, which initially seems, what do you mean? Magbil Shavas, I understand. You're going up to that level where everything is all about godliness and it's beyond existence. It's not nitfis. Like we said, who loy tough is ba'alman, who loy tough is bay. But the other level of who makemish elam, where we say the expression, I just wanted to see the expression, iu tough is b'kula alman, that's mashpili, is a different level. But he's saying no. What the pasuk is saying, that the very higher level that's beyond hu mashpili, that same very level is going down. So it's not like God is saying, I'm sending a messenger or I'm sending a reflection of the divine energy downward. That's very level, that's Magbi, is also mashpili. That's what he's saying, the pasuk is adding. The Einza Beis Hofchim Klal. And from that point of view, from Atzmus' point of view, there are no two opposites at all. The Masha b'shor shenitfus ein a nitfus ein zachidish kol kach. And that's where I'm stuck. I'm not sure what he means by this last line. I'll give you a few options. I have what to say about it, but I'm not positive which way it means. What is he saying? The Masha b'shor shenitfus ein zachidish kol kach. Why is he saying it's not a chiddush? First of all, it is a chiddush for us. By Atzmus, it's not a chiddush. I think what he's saying, this may be one way of explaining it. That's the Rebbe. The concept of nitfis and not nitfis that we learned earlier before we got to this pasuk is not a chiddush kol kach. But the concept of mashpili, that the same level that is absorbed in the ayin into yesh amiti, is the same level that goes down, that's a bigger chiddush. That may be one thing he's saying here. That's one way to explain it. Or he's coming to say a general statement, and I'm not leaning this direction. He's coming to say in general, it's not a chiddush by the Eibishter, that should be two hofchim as one. By us it's a chiddush, but not by the Eibishter. But the fact that he says ein za chiddush kol kach tells me that, what do you mean kol kach? If it's not a chiddush, it's not a chiddush. By the Eibishter, it's simple. He has no problem. It's not opposites. It's all one. Chiddush kol kach sounds like that the nitfus and nitfus is a chiddush, but it's not such a major chiddush. Mashpili, Magbi and Hamashpili is a bigger chiddush. That's what it sounds like the parenthesis coming to add. I cannot say definitely. It's very brief and very succinct and very concise. So I want to think about it more. I do think that when we learn that till the end of the paragraph, we're going to get more clarity on this topic. But I didn't want to skip the parentheses. I just wanted to go through it. And that's my thought on the matter. But as I said, I want to do more research on this topic. So I'm not ready to say anything to finalize and definitive. Somebody wants to comment on it, by all means, but I'd rather read now till the end of the paragraph. And as I said, we may get clarity in that. I also want to add one more thing. I think it's connected to what we learned in the previous page. You remember when he said in the parentheses, let's go back. He said in the parentheses on the previous page, what did he say? He said, I'm talking about 423. So the Mittler Rebbe said like this, that Magbi is not shaykh in Atzmus. Because the whole idea of higher and lower is not shaykh in Atzmus. It's only shaykh in Oyer. The parentheses where he said like this. The Ba'atzmus saying so mamish le shaykh gamiyin hagba zu. In Agbi zehu begeva, because that's already levels. So it sounds to me that there's something in common between that and what we're learning here. In other words, in Atzmus, Hamagbi is not applicable. The chiddush is that even in the level of Oyer, Hamagbi and Hamashpili are united as one, due to Atzmus perspective. I think that is connected, but I'm not positive about it. I just wanted to add that as well to the equation. As I said, I need to do more research on this, but that's so far what my findings.
It looks to me also what you said just now.
Yeah. But it's not so clear. That's why I said I want to read till the end of the paragraph. Okay.
Was there something about Magbihi Lashavas that Magbihi is to raise and Lashevis is to lower versus Mashpili, Liros, Mashpili is to bring down, and Liros, I guess, would be the opposite, to see, look up. Was that
No.
nothing you said about that? Okay.
Hamagbihi is going upward from the ayin into the yesh amiti. Mashpili is going downward from the ayin to the yesh of the mid of bina and the midas downward. To see shemayim v'aretz means he relates to existence. Lidas b'shemayim v'aretz is the divine relating to existence. Hamagbihi is the divine beyond existence.
Lashevis, though, is like a downward motion. Magbihi Lashevis, it's like...
That's not how he interprets it here. Here, if you go back to the last page, he interprets Lashevis being that it's elevated to the point that all it is a kisei, is a throne for the divine essence. That's what he interpreted on page 423. That it's Lashevis and B'kemei ha'atzmi. So it's not that he's going down, it's that he's Magbihi Lashevis, that the Lashevis is on the level of Magbihi all the way upward. It's also the simple interpretation that he dwells on high. And Mashpili is how he comes down into, relates to existence. Yeah. Now, if what I'm saying is correct, that this is connected to the previous parentheses, then what the Rebbe then is that Atzmus is nitvis and ein nitvis is one thing. That's not a chiddush kol kach. The chiddush is that even when we're talking the levels of Milo Mata, going up and down, there's also that the very level that's Magbihi is also the level that's Mashpili.
Because
But
this
still,
is Atzmus
but still, the language, the Masha b'shah shenitvis ain't yeah. And also the expression b'shah shenitvis ve'ein nitvis. Let's continue reading and let's see if we get some more clarity. Okay. What do you want to say?
No, b'shah shenitpas ein nitpas. It's according to what we learned. It's not such a big chiddush.
That's what I'm explaining here. Yeah, correct. Okay. Let's read on now. Now here, I want to refer you back to something we learned earlier in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, but this is also, interestingly, the last page in Ayin Beis that the Rebbe Rashab left us with. When he went back to Shema Yisrael, I'm giving an introduction before we read on right now. Remember, you may recall that we learned that all this is the Yichudim are not just happening. This is our mitzvah, liyachid Hashem. It's a mitzvah. Shema Yisrael is a mitzvah in the Torah. It's not just a statement and observation. It's the mitzvah, liyachid Hashem Yisborach. We have a mitzvah that though we live in a world of a multiplicity, of multitudes and details, it's a mitzvah liyachid Hashem, which means to find and explain and understand and experience the divine unity within everything. And that's what Hashem Echad means. Echad, to be mamshich the Aleph into the Ches, the seven heavens, and Rekia, the seven Sadai and Rekim ba'aretz, is Ches, 8, and the Dal Ruchas Elam. Remember that he said earlier, we learned in Ayin Beis earlier, La'amlachte, b'shamayim la'amlachte l'maylo l'mato. The Gemara says, to establish God as king throughout all of existence. That's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to unite, to reveal the divine unity in all the details of existence. What was the expression, the exact expression? Amlachte, trying to remember. Let me just look it up. I'm looking at Ayin Beis right now, where he spoke about this. The holy bonus of Kol Hamayich Be'echad. Let me just find it inside. Give me a minute. Okay, getting there. Yeah. Okay, I'm looking on page, if you want to follow. I'm looking at page 1417, but then he continues and he speaks about Kad amlichte lamailo lamato uladal leruchas. That's why we're ma'arich be'echad, that we're mamshich that v'l'sulay tzlichas. Okay, so that's a mitzvah. And who has this mitzvah? Neshamas Yisrael. Because Neshamas Yisrael are rooted in the highest levels, all the way up there, they have the power to reveal in a world with his divine unities concealed and to be miyachid. If you remember, the Torah Sholom was all built. He said, our mitzvah is not liyachid atzilus. He says it's liyachid atzmus. So on page 1477, the last page in Ayin Beis, I just want to refer to one line, which is taken from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, but now is going to be relevant to what we're discussing. He says like this. He speaks about the yichud of Das Ayin and Das Tachten, and then he says, at the end of this, the unification of these two levels of Das Ayin and Das Tachten that we're learning about, that's the whole contemplation of Shema Yisrael, that the divine soul is educating the animal soul, that it too should love God and become fuel, shemen, for godly passion and light. This mitzvah that the Neshamas Yisrael have to miyachid Eibishter Yichud Ilah is also to miyachid both of them, not just to say Yichud Tata is one level, Yichud Ilah is another, but to miyachid both of them. Lahav mahava echad beechad, shebchinis Yichud Ilah ubchinis Yichud mamish kama Yichud Ilah. That's the mitzvah we have, and he goes on to speak about that. That's how actually Ayin Beis ends, literally on this point. How we V'zeu Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hashem Elokeinu is b'chinas Yichud Ilah. Hashem Echad is Yichud Tata. That's what Shema Yisrael. Who's saying? Who is it? Shema Yisrael. You Yisrael should hear this, appreciate it, and be miyachid Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad. Shneim heim b'posuk Echad. This is the last lines of Ayin Beis. U'lemahava Echad be'Echad shagam Yichud Tata b'chinas Yichud kama Yichud Ilah mamash. I just concluded, Mamish, the last line in Ayin Beis. So you see, that point he's coming back to now. And this is what he's going to say. So he says like this. And that's why he's now going to explain the first half of the Pasuk. Remember, Hamashpili, Hamagbihi Sheves, and Hamashpili leaders, B'Shemayim V'Oretz, is the second, there's a phrase that comes before it. Mi Kashem Elokeinu. Who is like God, our God? Who is like Hashem Elokeinu? So now he says, Ulazeh Omar. I'm reading the end of the 5 lines, 6 lines from the end of the paragraph, middle paragraph, page 424. Ulazeh Omar, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Dafke. Who is saying that? Hamiyuchad Dafke, Hamiyuchad L'Shamas Yisrael. Who is like our God? Who's saying that? If David HaMelech is saying it, but it's reflecting Neshamas Yisrael, Dafka Miyuchad Neshamas Yisrael. It's a perspective that is Miyuchad Dafka, unique and customized Neshamas Yisrael. K'moshehem b'sharsham ba'atzmus ein sof, as these Neshamas are in their root in Atzmus ein sof. That's why you could say Hamashpili and Hamagbihi and Hamashpili, because you're accessing and invoking Atzmus ein sof. K'moy ki ato avinu shelamaylo. Like when we say Ata Avinu, you are our father. That's a very unique relationship. That's not saying anyone has that relationship. It's Dafka Mika Hashem Elokeinu. So Idn are saying, who is like our God, who is both Hamagbihi and Hamashpili all as one? Because since it's unique to Neshamas Yisrael, who are rooted in Atzmus Ein Sof, they can make that statement. They can reach that level. That what? We're talking about a level that is higher, called Iker, from the very essence and source of God's Ishtalshlus. Shemagbili u'mashpili shoven mamish mitamanal. Where Magbihi and Mashpili, these two levels of the elevating and going into the source of Das Elyon, and Mashpili, Das Tachton, coming down into the divine existence, are mamish one. Shavin mamish metamanal, for the reason that we said earlier. So now we understand it's not just a nice statement that's being said here. Mika Hashem Elokeinu. It's miyuchad l'shamas Yisrael, who have this unique ability to come to this awareness of Hamagbihi and Hamashpili. So and as one. So this all comes together. Mika Hashem Elokeinu. He's going to talk more about what Hashem and Elokeinu is, which itself is also joining the two levels. But right now we're speaking about the Neshamas Yisrael is Mika Hashem Elokeinu. And let me continue the parentheses, and then I'll stop for questions. The Im Kain. So based on this, remember there's the two Yuds. The Yud of Hamagbihi is the Yud, the Ayin of the Chochmah Gduma that's absorbed by the Yesh Amiti, in the Yesh Amiti. There's the Yud in Mashpili. That's the Chochmah that goes into Bina, into Midas, into existence. So he says, the Im Kain, Hayud de Magbihi, based on this, the Yud of Magbihi, the end of Magbihi, that Yud, Hu Hayud de Mashpili. That's the same Yud as in Mashpili. Bli Shinui Klal Uklal. Without any shift, it's completely immutable, it's without any change. So it's two takeh. From our point of view, it's two words, two levels. But in truth, from the point of view of Mika Hashem Elokeinu, of Atzmus, it's no Shinui Klal Uklal. Kamosha Kosav Ani Avaya Leishanisi. Like we learned earlier, there's no change. The Yud, as it is encompassed in the source, is the same Yud as the divine that's in existence. Again, Das Elyon and Das Tachton as one. Ukamoi, and he gives an example, another parenthesis. Within the parentheses, we find when sometimes you say Havaya Adnai, so Havaya is Yud K Vav K, and Adnai ends with a Yud. So Kabbalah and Chassidus explain that the Yud K Vav K, the first Yud of Yud K Vav K, and the last Yud of Adnai, Aleph Dal Nun Yud, are one. Hayud D'Shem Havaya Shebereish. The Yud D'Shem Havaya Shebereish at the top, at the head, at the beginning, Hu Atzmei Hayud D'Shem Adnei B'Sof. That's very much it's connected, the same level as the Yud, all the way to the end of the process when it goes all the way into the Yud of the last letter of Adnai. The Dal L'Maven. And with this, he concludes the parentheses. And I would say you have to make two parentheses, one that covers Ukamay Hayud and the other that covers the Im Kain Hayud. Because it started.
This parenthesis is not finished.
So the parentheses is. Let me just finish and let me explain it so everyone can hear. Then we'll stop for any comments and questions. Just a moment. So bottom line is, so now we see how these two Yuds become one, similar to the Yud of Havaya and Adnai. The beginning and the end are all connected. But this is from the perspective of Mika Hashem Elokeinu of Atzmus Ein Sof, as he says. So it's not just two levels; it's two levels that come together as one, which was a fundamental piece. Especially, we still have to understand how this helps the Nefesh Habamis reach a level of Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. But you can begin to understand that it's not just that existence is created by God. It's not just that existence is sustained by godliness, but the very existence is completely one from God's point of view with the highest levels. So when a Nefesh Elikis can explain that to Nefesh Habamis, that's what he says in Tereir and Amitla Rebbe's Maimer and Ayin Beis. He doesn't really get to that point. He doesn't conclude. That's what will ultimately turn the Nefesh Habamis to become from its own love, its own needs, to become Shem and oil that ultimately loves godliness. Okay. So I'm going to stop here. Comments, questions, please.
So maybe when he's saying Mika Hashem Elokeinu Davke, so the Dogish is not Hashem Elokim, but Elokeinu Davke Miyuchal Shamesh Yisrael.
Yeah, like Ato Avinu. Like Ato Avinu, yes.
Right. And maybe, I don't think this is a pshat, but maybe also Hashem Elokeinu is symbolizing the two different days.
We'll see. As I said, he's going to talk about this more later. And remember, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, is also, in Shema Yisrael, you say Hashem Elokeinu.
Yeah.
Hashem Echad.
And in the second parenthesis is not, one parenthesis is not finished.
I just said that if I just said that's why you have to add another parenthesis after I said 2 parentheses at the end.
Yeah, it's not printed. Okay.
I have a question, and maybe it's just coincidental, maybe not. I mentioned earlier this week that I read a mimer, the quote Hashem Havaya Nigla, in the Inyan of how the or can reside, even though hidden, can still be tolerated by the makam machalo, the seemingly vacuous space that God created when He created the universe. Where He, at least from our perspective, hid Himself. He contracted Himself so that we could be, because like Nadav and Avihu went to be before that godliness that's above creation, and they were consumed by it. And just as Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't see the face of Hashem, or else he would expire, his soul would be bound up. So the inyan of or Gvul, how can it be in the Makam Machal, in the vacuous chamber of creation, at the same time as the or Gvul, which is the or that creates, the or of the Kav, and is this here that we're learning the Kel Deus Hashem, these two perspectives, these two forms of godly knowledge? Is this coincident? Does this coincide with the notion of how or Gvul can essentially be can be found in the Chalal, even though it's hidden, because Atzmus is everywhere? So, like, it's tied to the Rishima, and I don't want to go into all these details, but are these concepts related, or are these separate concepts? Because in that mimer over there, he does talk about or. He's not talking about Atzmus per se. He's talking or Gvul and or that's Mugbal, that's limited. Are these concepts related, or I'm confusing things?
We're jumping ahead. I would wait till we finish this whole topic, when I'm going to bring it back and connect it to Ayin Beis and all the themes in Ayin Beis. And these ideas you're bringing up will be clarified more. It's too much elaboration needed now to bring that in. So I would reserve and say,
comment. Okay.
Keep that thought, keep the question, and I will address it on my own. I was going to address it anyway because it's part of the whole flow of Ayin Beis.
Right.
So right now,
cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Wonderful. Before you turn off the recording, and maybe you'll take more questions or comments, but I wanted to make sure you clarify what your schedule is, because you're traveling.
Yeah, sure. Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment that something that put me in mind of, when the angels going up and down at the same time, like they're going with the Jacob's ladder. Is that like a metaphor for what you're talking about here, you think? Or is it just too far-fetched?
Not necessarily, because there's two separate stages. There's angels going up and angels going down.
Okay, they're not doing it the same. They're not.
The emphasis is not that they're one. They're just doing that. That's the conventional up and down process. Mm-hmm. Here, the emphasis is that they actually become like one. There's one. It's like one reality.
Mm-hmm.
But there's much more to go. If you'll see, you continue the next paragraph, you'll see he's going to talk more about this. He's going to ask some questions. And that's what I said, I think will get clearer as we go. And the goal is, of course, all this is going to help us go back to Ayin Beis and understand not just what Ayin Beis says, but also understand the discussion of the whole context of Ayin Beis as the interface. But we'll stop here. End of paragraph, page 424. And so this class, I will be off. I'm going soon to Israel in a few hours. So there won't be a class tomorrow. There won't be a class until a week from Thursday, as I said the other day. So basically from tomorrow through basically 1 week, 7 days, no class. The next class will be on the 16th of May. So 8 through 15, no class. 16th of May, we shall resume. Okay?
Which is Wednesday, right?
What?
16 is Wednesday.
16th is Thursday.
Thursday.
I'll be back on the
Have a good
15th.
trip.
Thank you.
Maybe
doesn't stop you
have a
this does not stop you
meeting
from
with
learning and
Bibi
discussing.
Netanyahu.
I'm saying this does not stop you from learning and discussing and going through it. Yeah, and may Israel be successful in this no offensive. Hopefully they can finish it up.
Amen.
And I'm glad they did it, and they're not listening to the forces that have other agendas in mind.
Absolutely.
Well, there was a cutoff of
Hey, so that's their problem. That's not our problem. You cannot be blackmailed when it comes to survival.